Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's December 8th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue. How are you?
Hey, Eric. I'm good, although slightly disappointed in myself because I think I promised that I would be more festively decorated in my background by this week than I was last week. And I can report that I am 0% more festively adorned in my apartment than I was last week. Let's see if I can double down on this coming week.
No additive cheer.
No additive cheer.
You still have time.
And I'm cheery. Right, so
it's a state of mind.
It is a state of mind, although I will say, Sue, seriously, blue and white still. Can't even put on red or green. Nice red shirt, by the way, Eric. Good job.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got some incremental cheer going on over here. My skeleton has his Christmas hat on. Got my little Christmas tree up. Still need some lights. And I've got my Don't Give Up the Ship flag.
Go Navy.
Yep, in honor of Army-Navy Week.
Yeah. I have a feeling what we'll be talking about on Monday.
That's right. So, wanted to ask you, it's hard to pinpoint a favorite Christmas movie, right? Instead, I will ask, what are your top 5 favorite Christmas movies?
One that I watched this weekend and is the source of so many lines in my everyday conversation, Christmas Vacation with Chevy Chase. It just makes me laugh. And it's clever. And like I said, it produces lines that I use all the time. Although I do use a lot of movie lines in general in casual conversation, like "You're killing me, Smalls" from The Sandlot. But Christmas Vacation, fun holiday fare, absolute number 1. Number 2 for me is The Santa Claus. I like the original a lot, but the whole enterprise is pretty good. Scrooged is one of my favorites. The Christmas Carol can be interpreted so many ways. I mean, Spirited is the most recent one, I think, it's a musical with Will Ferrell. But Scrooged is one of my very favorite adaptations of the Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
Number 4 is It's a Wonderful Life. I don't need the colorized version of it. I just think it's a great story, makes me happy. It's a love story. I'm a sucker for that. And then finally, and this is really, I'll choose one, but I'm going to admit that I am addicted to Hallmark Christmas movies. Mm-hmm. There's nothing better than this time of year when I know I can watch a holiday Christmas movie. What's funny is you're like, sure, Sue, we expect that of you. You're kind of a sap. Jim was just as hooked. Many a weekend passed with just us watching one movie after another. But I do have a favorite of the Hallmark Christmas movies, and that's one called Catch Me If You Claus. So if you do Hallmark and you haven't seen that one, or you don't do Hallmark and you want to see, come on, can it really be worth it? Check out Catch Me If You Claus. What did I miss that you like?
We share Christmas Vacation. Can't beat it. Watch it every year. We share the Santa Claus. I add Die Hard in there.
Okay. Christmas movie? I'm not sold.
Absolutely.
I'm not sold. But it's set at Christmas, but it isn't about Christmas. It is a great movie, though. Always worth watching.
And then I'll throw Elf in there.
Great movie.
Love Elf.
Great movie.
And then Home Alone.
How can you not? Yeah, those are all really good. I think that just shows that there's a bunch of great Christmas movies out there.
Yeah, it's hard to narrow down.
It is. And the bottom line is they all have a story of second chances and redemption and good triumphing over evil. So how can you miss?
Yeah, like Die Hard. All right.
Press on. Press on.
So this week, White House released the National Security Strategy of 2025, our reactions to that. We'll also talk the Department of Defense down selecting 1,000 contracts for the Golden Dome system and undersea warfare, our current superiority in that domain, and the future of autonomous operations in the undersea.
Oh, great topics. Three great topics. Yeah, 3 great ones.
All right. We'll start with the 2025 National Security Strategy. a document that is already drawing very different reactions from around the world. Something you don't see every day. The Kremlin has welcomed it, saying the strategy largely accords with Russia's own view of the world and even praising its language on reining in NATO expansion. Closer to home, critics in Washington and Europe argue that by elevating the Western Hemisphere and border security to the top of the priority list, this strategy effectively sidelines NATO and risks abandoning Europe to deal with Russia and China on its own. But there are also enthusiastic supporters. Secretary Pete Hegseth and other backers hail it as the end of utopian idealism in U.S. foreign policy, a hard-nosed America First reset that focuses on migration, hemispheric security, rebuilding the industrial base, and big bets like the Golden Dome missile shield that we'll talk about later. So what was your reaction to reading the 2025 National Security Strategy?
I'm not a fan of the tone. It's wastes words on self-congratulation, and it diminishes previous accomplishment. It focuses on elites and institutions, and it's overly reliant on hard power. The top line is there are a lot of similarities with the first one.
The first one being the
2017, and we'll talk about that. And I'll do a little bit of compare and contrast of that because I was there for Trump's first national security strategy. The 2017 national security strategy formally, in essence, declared an end to the CT era and a return to great power competition. I'm pretty much on the record on this saying that I think one of the accomplishments of the Trump administration, the first one particularly, and it continues with this one, is getting us to focus on China. As a former intelligence officer, we had long known that they were a rising power with tremendous capability, but we just couldn't get any attention, first because of Russia and second because of counterterrorism. It was also marked by this America First idea, America leading and shaping a world that reflects U.S. interests and values. It included democracy, rule of law, and tolerance. I don't know that it bothered me much about America First because I think in that first version, it's okay for the U.S. to be a sovereign power and have interests of its own. And it is not antithetical to being a world power, and Sue's words, world force for good, to say that we have sovereign interests that we get to advance to. So that was the first one. The second one doesn't really redefine the worldview from this one, but it does accelerate it. And it does some explicit criticizing of post-Cold War strategy, which again, Eric, you mentioned, I don't know that there's anything inherently wrong about that because we are not in a Cold War world. And even when you define a great power, Cold War isn't the right model for how you have to do it today. But I will say that there's a lot of attacks on what have been, I'm going to call it post-World War II alliances that gave us great strength. NATO is one that you mentioned, but it's not the only one that gave us great strength. It's an interesting one on it isolates us from the affairs of other countries only if their activities directly threaten our interests. I think that's up for interpretation about what our interests are. And then I think my last point is going to be, when you read this in aggregate, one of the things you come away with is it is way more tactical. It is way more situational. On the one hand, you see it talk about alliances, but it's really talking about is an alliance is good for me anytime I need something economically out of that country. And so it blows up the traditional things that have given us stability and friends. And it says, no, we're gonna partner with everyone if we wanna. And I think there's an interesting piece of your comment about Russia saying they really welcomes the wording because Russia, China, and so many have pursued relationships with foreign countries in terms of, well, what can I get out of it rather than a what can I build with it? And I think this just moves us down the path of kind of the tactical gain rather than the collective strength.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine in a little bit and focus on the Western Hemisphere. But before we get to that, I want to talk just strategy in general, because I got the same sense. And it reminded me of Secretary of War Hegseth's comments when he met with the generals in Quantico. And our reaction to that was largely a tactical discussion for strategic leaders. And so one of the complaints within this document of previous national security strategies was that it was too broad, too all-encompassing. Previous strategies had included every country and every area of the world so as to make them not feel left out, even though most areas of the world were covered in this one also. But nonetheless, what is the point of the national security strategy? Because as a former principal deputy director of national intelligence, you would then take, as you did in 2017, this document
Right.
from the White House, and then what do the different departments and agencies do with it? And then how does a more strategic level document help you formulate your own individual strategy?
Yeah, great question. At their best, and again, I think this was something that I considered useful about the first Trump administration is with its national security strategy that really only had 4 big pillars of it. They weren't massively different from this, but they were more overarching. What you then do is you develop your own institutional US strategies against it, but we also developed country-specific strategies. What's our Iran strategy? What's our China strategy? What's our Russia strategy? And so at their best, especially when they are broader, you then have each institution with its responsibility being able to develop something tactical. When the first document is super tactical, and listen, this document makes it clear what you're supposed to do.
Hmm.
And so you don't get the benefit of, and I'm sorry, I'm a broken record on this, on the professional cadre of people really thinking through, okay, if that's what you want to accomplish, this is what you will do. This document talks a lot about what you will do. And so
Hmm.
you just don't get the benefit of real implementable strategies out of it. This defines actions. At best, you like it when it defines outcomes and you get to develop the strategies against it. And it is so consistent with what this administration has done in the first year that I don't
Hmm.
know that there are many surprises, whether it's on border protection, power protection, technology, and industrial strategy. And maybe we devote a whole episode or over the course of the next few episodes, take each one of those pillars and talk about how we think about them. Because
Sure.
when you say the words, border protection, awesome. You and I have talked a lot about how knowing who comes into the country, being thoughtful about that, and having an immigration policy that's useful. But buried in this document, if you squint at it, is an anti-migration policy that I think is antithetical to the broader issue of US leadership. And you could go down on the alliances, even our technology and industrial strategy. The technology and industrial strategy portion of this document is focused on some very specific actions in very specific industries, which again isn't bad if those things are the devolution from a more strategic document. But this one is pretty specific to some interests that seem to be economically very close to this administration. The other thing I'd say is it says it's gonna focus on only sovereign nations and nation-state focused, and it's not gonna be as interested in non-state actors. The world's greatest non-state actors are a lot of the companies that this document purports to strengthen. So, how does that go?
Mm. Yeah. So you'd probably put this in the special filing cabinet from corporate.
If I were gonna write a letter back to it, I would say, "Where's the emphasis on human development?" It talks about humans some. The little bit that it talks about is kind of, "We're gonna get rid of DEI and focus on competence and merit." No, no, no. You only get competence and merit in the United States if you focus on education and health services, and it's silent on those. And
Hmm.
if you want to talk about why China is rising and why this document continues to focus on China, yay. They didn't do it because their missiles and their ships and their weapons. They did it because they lifted 1.5 billion people to higher levels so they could perform better. So I think it is glaring that this strategy does not include those as national interests.
You mentioned that as being economically driven. One of the things I'll highlight here as just one of those more tactical examples is a line: all embassies must be aware of major business opportunities in their country, especially major government contracts, Every U.S. government official that interacts with these countries should understand that part of their job is to help American companies compete and succeed. It doesn't sound like something that would go in this overarching document. This would be something that comes down maybe a second or third level below from Department of State.
This is just a really interesting inclusion of actual U.S. business strategy in our national security strategy. I kind of go both ways on it, and that is, I think it's really important that we, for our industry and for our security, that we allow our companies to be vibrant and strong and successful. I think the world is better when we're the technical leadership because of the way I think we develop technology and because of the policies that come with it. I don't mind the idea at all that this document advances in terms of we want to be the standard setters, and historically we have been, as a government, loath to put ourselves in the standard conversations, being more silent on that because we have always valued the independence of the private sector from the U.S. government because it just makes it more vibrant. I mean, the reason why our adversaries come and steal the stuff that comes out of our industrial base is because what? It's the product of competition, not the product of a 5-year plan. There's some interesting questions about when you insert the U.S. government in terms of business opportunities. You really have to say how equivalent are those opportunities going to be? Are you going to pick and choose winners and losers? And then if I'm in the intelligence community, one of the things that we haven't done that I'll choose China as an example that they do is they do steal secrets from private companies and they give them to the government so that it can be used to advance its interests. And that hasn't been something
Yeah.
that we do. And so it's interesting once you insert this as business relationships as a national security strategy. Yay, it helps leadership, but boy, you could take some slippery slope actions that would actually take away some of our competitive fire and potentially erode that boundary between government and industry that I think has served us well in terms of speed and reach.
Yep. Let's talk about the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. A large
Mhm.
focus of this national security strategy is the Western Hemisphere and specifically our own border security. The Monroe Doctrine, if you remember, is from President James Monroe's 1823 annual message to Congress, which warned European powers not to interfere in affairs of the Western Hemisphere. It was invoked in 1865 when the U.S. government exerted diplomatic and military pressure in support of the Mexican president Benito Juarez. And then in 1904, European creditors of a number of Latin American countries threatened armed intervention to collect debts, but President Teddy Roosevelt promptly proclaimed the right of the U.S. to exercise an international police power to curb such chronic wrongdoing in his so-called Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The U.S. Marines were involved, and that kicked off the Banana Wars, sent into Santo Domingo in 1904, Nicaragua in 1911, and Haiti in 1915. 1962, we also invoked it symbolically when the Soviet Union began to build their missile sites in Cuba, leading to the Bay of Pigs. And then with the support of the Organization of American States, President Kennedy threw a naval and air quarantine around the island. So this new Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine says that we'll enlist and expand, enlist established friends in the hemisphere to control migration, stop drug flows, strengthen stability and security on land and sea. We will expand by cultivating and strengthening new partners while bolstering our own nation's appeal as the hemisphere's economic and security partner of choice. What do you think, Sue?
Number one is I love us focusing in the Western Hemisphere, and not just because China has run roughshod through the global South
Mm-hmm.
and created beachheads and handholds and footholds in our backyard with people who are culturally aligned to us, a lot of democratic societies, lots of advantages. So I like a focus in our hemisphere.
Yep.
2, I don't think it is improper at all to really look at the security considerations, and that's really what the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary were about, which is much like we have the Atlantic Pacific as great buffers, in protecting our security and America's resilience and ability to thrive, having foreign powers, especially if it includes military capabilities that are much closer to our borders, but also economic capabilities that disadvantage us. So I don't think it's improper for us to consider the security implications of people
Hmm.
coming to our hemisphere. To the last point, though, even how you talk about the Trump corollary, enlist and expand friends to control migration, stop drug flows, and strengthen stability. I think this is where, in aggregate, I am troubled by the whole treatment of allies and partners. It is very non historically US and very similar with especially China, but certainly Russia, which is no, 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 no. I want to develop partners because of what they can do for me with no consideration of how we build strength together. It is so ethnocentric that I understand
Hmm.
why our neighbors are like, whoa, 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 whoa. Love the opportunity to work with you, see the opportunities about being a partner with you. Don't really like the language you're using to say that we're going to engage with you simply for the advancement of our nation. So, in the Trump corollary, despite them being historically okay things to do, you still have this, I think, very myopic view of what America first is. And that is America only, for America only, and the rest of you all are here to serve our interests. I hear no discussion in this of how we build strength in our hemisphere so that we fight off the forces of colonialism that are being advanced by others. Did I miss anything that you think of?
No, I think focusing on the Western Hemisphere is a
Uh-huh.
good idea from a number of reasons, many of which you mentioned. If I compared and contrast the resource availability between South and Latin America and Africa, Africa's got a lot of resources, man, a lot more
Yeah,
instability, borders that were colonially drawn
yeah.
and under contention all the time. It seems like a number of different cultural differences, and it is hard to get that continent on the same page. And even
Yeah.
regionally, between if you break it into West Africa, East Africa, et cetera, together, seems like, I don't know, easier is the right word, but a better path forward to align with Latin American countries than it would be to try to do that same thing in terms of resource and alliances and moving forward with Africa.
Great point, and I think I agree with everything you said. I'm gonna do an "and" on you, though. The one reason, I guess this is an just bashed ethnocentricity, and I think this is one, or just US centricity. The world's supply chain is gonna go through Africa. By 2040, I think the projection is there'll be 25% of the world's population, and it's undeniable the natural resources they're sitting on. So, for all the difficulties that you just articulated about the instability,
Hmm.
to the potential of working through those things so that we continue to support what is going to be just a huge part of the world's population and strengthen our supply chains by being partners of choice. So, I agree with you, but I think I'd still wrestle through this challenge because of the potential advantages we have with where they're going and what they possess.
Yeah, and they mentioned that at the end on the last page of the strategy, Africa, and how we've too long been aid-focused
Uh-huh.
relationship, and we need to be investment-focused relationship and favoring partnership with capable and reliable states. So almost picking and choosing who we partner with instead of the broad brushstroke of all Western Hemisphere and some select African countries.
This administration's diminution, I get it. You don't want to be aid focused, but sometimes aid is the gateway drug to shared development. One of the organizations that I know well is the DRK Foundation, and they do unrestricted capital for young entrepreneurs who want to change the world. And when I look at their programs of things that they're doing in Africa, there are real opportunities there. They do go through investing in the humans and the nation state, but the outcomes are pretty tremendous. So, like I said, I'd wrestle through the difficulty to get there. And I think that this administration's choice to diminish our participation globally, if it doesn't advance us economically, is short-sighted.
Yeah, we've advocated for the use of
Right.
soft power many times before. This document does mention soft power 4 whole times, but it does seem like they quantify soft power more in terms of there's economic leverage, making the deals and tariffs and all that stuff, but also talking about President Trump's leadership and peace negotiations, almost using that as a brokerage of soft power, which, hey, it's not a heavy lift. We can just do these deals between these countries, create this peace, and then there's all this goodwill.
Again, it is a big shift. It is a big difference from the way we have viewed our global responsibility and opportunity. Historically, those two things were bundled. This document tends to walk away from the responsibility side. And again, I think that one of the reasons that we've had so much impact and quite frankly, so many friends helping us when we needed it is because we advanced our responsibility to them as partners, not just our needs from them as partners.
We've been discussing this for quite some time now. Do you want to talk about China anymore? Or do you have any additional reactions about China and the specific strategy there?
I think, like I say, I think you and I should talk about whether we can take just segments of this. It does continue to focus on China. Again, however, it's pretty, I'm going to, the word simplistic was going to come out of my mouth. I don't know in this area, when you think about a big strategy and it devolving into micro strategies, I don't think this document provides much guidance in terms of where we're going to go with China. And I guess the other thing that is interesting is, as you and I have talked about local options a lot, the national news doesn't talk about just how much foreign investment, foreign partnership is important to local development and how many
Hmm.
local companies and state and local governments are engaged in advancing. And so it would have been interesting if this document had viewed that as a national security issue and given a little bit more focus on how that can happen or what the limits of that might be.
Yeah, some more
Mhm.
infrastructure. They talked about energy
Yeah.
a little bit, but yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but just China's not going away as a competitor, right? Doctrinally, they believe the world is now set up that they can be the dominant competitive force, and they are going to continue to pursue aggressive actions to be that. This document mentions a lot of things that could potentially be counters and or activities that are not just pro-con, but actually develop strategies to both deter and to use, and I don't think it advances that very much over the last one we had.
Well, before we move on, so some good things we like, but much like the AI policy plan when we reviewed that this past summer, you're reading this document and you're like, all right, that makes sense. This is a good idea. I can get behind this. And then there are these lines that get thrown in there that make you take a pause and say, wait, what? So I'm going to play a little game called the bearing game,
Sure.
Sue. I'm going to read direct quotes from the 2025 National Security Strategy and see how many I can get through while you maintain your composure.
All right.
Are you
Yeah,
ready?
you might need to get your bleeping button ready.
We'll see. All right. Number one, our greatest advantages remain our system of government and dynamic free market economy.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I believe in that.
Number two, border security is the primary element of national security. We must protect our country from invasion, not just from unchecked migration, but from cross-border threats such as terrorism, drugs, espionage, and human trafficking.
I think I'd be okay with the top line of it if I didn't also know how violently anti-migration it is and how desperately wrong I think that is. But so far, I can squint at that. And if I were someone who's building a strategy off of that, I could build it in a way that was consistent with this document and my values.
Okay, this isn't the best, but this is my favorite. President Trump uses unconventional diplomacy, America's military might, and economic leverage to surgically extinguish embers of division between nuclear capable nations and violent wars caused by centuries long hatred.
Does gathering count as
Yep, no, I got you there. Yep, I knew that one would get you.
and do you know what part of it bothers me the most?
Is it the extinguish the embers of division?
No, it's the mention of a person's name. This is the national security strategy. It is not the Trump strategy. I lose my mind over this over personalization of a position as though those interests, those values are the ones dominating. So, yeah, you got me on that one. And I was trying to gather. You can strike that whole thing, and the document is better and no worse.
Oh, it gets better. The next one. We reject the disastrous climate change and net zero ideologies that have so greatly harmed Europe, threaten the United States, and subsidize our adversaries.
The climate is changing. It does have effect on global security. It does have
Yep.
effect on national resilience. And when you say you reject that and then you take away money from things that allow localities to be ready, you've now become political to the point of harming people. I don't care that we have different policies with different administrations. I really don't. That's actually one of the great strengths of America. But when a policy is not just a different way of how to advance a national interest, but actually subverts what we know are national interests, then I have a problem with it.
You're going to
Oh,
love
no.
this one. Finally, we want the restoration and reinvigoration of American spiritual
Oh,
and cultural
no.
health,
Stop. Stop.
without which long-term security is impossible. Oh, it's not even the best part yet.
Okay.
This cannot be accomplished without growing numbers of strong, traditional families that raise healthy children. Talked about the booming population in Africa, exceeding that of the Western
Oof.
world. Got to have more kids.
Then make it possible to have more kids, then make it so that families can thrive and that we end health disparities and income disparities rather than this nebulous traditional family values that are code for one view of what's right. It's the coded language that has been manifest in things we see that is problematic about that, not that we don't need the restoration of an environment where everyone has the opportunity and anyone who perceives it aggressively can succeed. But that's not what this says. This is choosing a view of what the right way to live is. And that it's not just un-American, it's unhistorically valid.
Also, I don't think we raise children. We rear children.
There you go.
So thank you, Miss
Yeah.
Elizondo. All right. At the risk of running the rest of this whole show off the rails, I'm going to read the last one, which you've already read this document. So you've seen all these things.
I
You've already
know, but
experienced
I
them.
tried to throw them out as a bundle and look at the national security implications of them. You're forcing me to do
Oh, no, I took them out of context. They are standing alone
Yeah.
here because they jumped out of
No,
the
they
page of
didn't.
not being part of context.
Oh, if this were a book, I would never read it.
So it's only 25 pages.
I would have read the first 3 pages and I would have never opened it. Keep going. Keep going.
But then you wouldn't have got the contradiction between the absolute obliteration of Iran's nuclear program and the significant reduction in Iran's nuclear program. All right, here we go. You ready?
But you may have broken me already, but I'm going to try and focus.
President Trump has cemented his legacy as the president of peace.
And no,
Is it in there?
intellectual dishonesty is so breathtaking. I had been saying intellectual inconsistency, but that's not true. It's just intellectual dishonesty. One, peace isn't a scorecard. Peace is about whether every country is free to pursue its own economic viability if it can have sovereign borders without them being overtaken by a big guy who just wants something of what they have. No, just no, you're not the president of peace. You can't just put that name on you. Does anyone feel like the world is more peaceful right now?
Even if FIFA awards you the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize?
I think It is so stunning that not only have authoritarian regimes people who want something of us from an international perspective, but now private entities have figured out the way to get something from the U.S. is to flatter the president.
The medal was a nice touch.
Now, I will freely admit that I'm probably weird on this from the other perspective. When I had challenge coins in my various positions in the intelligence community, I never put my name on them because I didn't think anyone really cared that they got a coin or something from Susan M. Gordon. I thought that they would think it was cool to get a coin from the Deputy Director of National Intelligence. So I'm on the side of our institutions, our nation, our people are the source of our strength. That is still absolutely true. But everyone now knows that if you want any of that strength, the only way to get to it is by pandering to our president. And I think that's embarrassing if he could see it for what it is.
Let's spend this next segment under the sea, looking at how undersea superiority is shifting just as the U.S. Navy kills its Constellation-class frigate program after cost overruns and design drift, choosing to finish only the first 2 ships while promising faster, more threat-driven ship designs in the future. Same time, we're planning to sell F-35s to Saudi Arabia. Critics warn this could again expose U.S. stealth secrets to China after past hacks already siphoned off F-22 and F-35 data. Just look at a picture of a J-35. They weren't even subtle about the numbering convention. Begs the question whether America can sustain any high-end advantage in the air, on land, or at sea. Meanwhile, navies from the US and UK to Australia are racing to field autonomous submarine drones that can hunt enemy subs and guard fragile seabed cables, with big primes and fast-moving startups touting these UUVs as a step change in the underwater battle space. They're cheaper, more scalable than crewed submarines, but also lowering the bar for undersea sabotage and drone-on-drone combat. So one of the lines from the national security strategy, deterring a conflict over Taiwan, ideally by preserving military overmatch, is a priority. I don't know that we're going to achieve numerical overmatch, and it can't just be technology overmatch. So I think it has to be some combination thereof. Sue, what'd you think about these articles and where we're at in terms of undersea warfare?
So I'll bounce up for a second and just talk about this notion of advantage and overmatch. There has been a dearth of those kinds of conversations that I've heard about where we must have advantage, what must we protect, where we see coming vulnerability, and what actions we must take to preserve the advantage in an environment that's changing. One of those elements is economic, but it is not the only element. So, in general, love to hear more discussion of what U.S. interests writ large are. And there were some actually elements of the national security strategy that talked about that, but it just never went anywhere in terms of how are you going to do that, particularly as some of the economic approaches we're taking if they are not taken with an eye toward advantage and they're only taken with an eye toward resources, I think can have disastrous outcomes. So it feels like nationally we're in the weeds of trying to make the most money rather than continuing to look at how we have advantage, which to me is what a national security strategy should be about. But let's talk about the F-35, J-35, and the theft of our technology that comes either with or without our participation is not new, but the speed at which that transfer is happening against a backdrop of a nation that hasn't yet figured out what its next technical move is to have advantage. We had stealth, we had power projection, we lost robotics because we weren't minding the store in terms of foreign investment, and Japan and China took that away. So there has to be a bigger discussion of what advantages we need, and there has to be a better assessment of where the threats and vulnerabilities are coming from so that we're not only doing this every so often. Now let's talk about undersea. As a nation, we talked a lot about cyber and the importance of the digital environment for advantage. We had the opportunity to see where we lost some advantage in the cyber domain, whether it's from the theft of our intellectual property or influence over elections or shaping through campaigns. We are, with the formation of the Space Force and all the things we're doing, I think we're going to talk about Golden Dome next. We have long been superior in space, although, watch out, China's coming even on that front. As domains that we care about, we talk almost nothing about undersea. And undersea domains matters. Oceans aren't just about geography, they're strategic shield. Our ballistic missile submarines are perhaps the most important part of our nuclear deterrence
Yep, most important part of the triad.
and the most resilient and most important. It's also the source of some of our most sensitive intelligence, which again, remember, intelligence is about advantage. So the undersea domain is really important. And I think we will see it, or we'll wake up to it one day, kind of the way we woke up to cyber and the way we're now recognizing space as a contested domain. I think you're going to see undersea being incredibly important. And we've been sleeping on it a bit because we had so much advantage for so long. It's also a strategic territory. 95% of the world's digital traffic, including almost every financial transaction, moves through undersea cables.
Really? It doesn't go through satellites? That's
I know,
crazy.
just volumetrically, it's gigantic. So pipelines, seabed sensors, fiber networks, these are all now frontline infrastructure and it's under the water. And again, because we were the dominant player there, all of that was safe and secure. And now you mentioned the autonomous underwater vehicles, coupled with machine learning and new seabed sensor systems, they're transforming not only the environment, but what the nature of undersea conflict could be, much more defined by networks than it is even by submarines. And China is a fast riser in this space. So you didn't hear any of those discussions in the national security strategy. You didn't talk
Mm.
about where we needed to advance. Now, you can say that's because we don't want to give that away. You can certainly protect operational details and still make it clear that the U.S. is going to be an active participant. AUKUS is a great move. Increasing Asian Pacific security by the Good Guy Tuna Company is a really good idea. But I think the decisive contest of the future might not be in cyber or space, but it could be undersea, and we need to pay attention to it. It's the quiet backbone of global power. It really is. There's a reason why so many new companies are focused on this domain. The combination of what technologies are now available that make participation much more affordable. Just watch who's creating the infrastructure disproportionately, because they who control the infrastructure control the world.
So we've got more of our solar system mapped than we do the undersea floor, something like that.
And again, it has been an area of U.S. dominance for just the longest time. But we are not the big investors nationally compared to some other countries who have it clearly in their national security strategy. Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've seen some of the impacts of attacks on some of that infrastructure already.
Right.
The Nord Stream pipeline a couple years ago, a couple Russian intelligence ships and
Right.
ships dragging their anchor and cutting some of those lines. And it doesn't take that much to cause a serious disruption.
Just look for observables that this is true. Taiwan producing an indigenous submarine, and that single move has the potential to change its security posture against mainland China if it came to that. It's a really important domain.
We'll keep watching it. So the old domain, Golden Dome, the Missile Defense Agency has picked 1,014 qualifying offerers for the Scalable Homeland Innovative Enterprise Layered Defense, SHIELD, a 10-year contracting vehicle worth up to $151 billion that will feed technology into the Golden Dome Homeland Air and Missile Defense System. This is a down select from 2,463 first phase offers, so cut it about in half. These companies now form a pool that DoD can tap via task orders for work ranging from prototyping and weapons design to cybersecurity, data mining, command and control. Golden Dome itself is envisioned as a sprawling, multi-domain network of sensors and interceptors, including space-based interceptors designed to detect and shoot down ballistic, hypersonic cruise missiles and other advanced threats to the U.S. homeland. The money isn't flowing yet, no funds are obligated, but the Pentagon has pre-qualified this massive industrial base from primes to small firms to move fast once requirements are ready. We've talked already about space as a form of our critical infrastructure, and that some of our commercial space companies were starting to look abroad for more business because the U.S. government had been slow to react. So what's your reaction to this announcement from the MDA?
I think it's consistent with what has come out in terms of the Defense Department's new acquisition strategy and focus on differentiation, speed. So the idea of qualifying a bunch of companies to be participants that I presume means contracting with those companies for this purpose is easier. Yay.
Yeah.
You and I are both big fans of acquisition reform. The equal and opposite reaction is, oh my God, we're just throwing money at it to build a lot of things. And there are just a whole bunch of pieces that feel like there's an artificial 3-year deadline. And so we're just going to show that we had progress by throwing a lot of money to a lot of different people and expecting that somehow magically the combination of all the technical capabilities are going to yield a result. So I kind of have both those, and I think they're both true. And it'll be interesting over time. I still like the leader of this, so I have a lot of confidence in him. But boy, the pressure he's got to feel from the top to do something, right?
Yeah.
Is, I think, going to be something that's hard to resist. It represents what Secretary of Defense Hegseth talks about, which is urgency, right? So you can say, look how urgently we're moving. And every company who's looking for something to say that they have done in order to garner more investment or more customers, I think that's going to work.
Yeah.
You did mention, I think it is an opportunity for us to unify our space community and maybe turn around a little bit of what I think is, because of lack of action of the government, a lack of confidence in the U.S. government as a primary customer by commercial space companies. This could turn that around. But again, if all it represents is you've got a name on an IDIQ, which is a type of contract that is a big pool of money that you still have to compete for, I think it has not as much potential. But can I talk about this and SDI a little bit? Because it's instructive.
SDI being the Strategic Defense
Right.
Initiative, President Reagan's 1980s Star Wars program.
Yes, Eric, that's the one. That's the one I meant. So 1983, Reagan's idea was to build an almost perfect shield over America. It was focused on Russia ambitions, but the technology wasn't ready, nor did we understand the physics to allow some of that technical development. Costs were massive. Politics were challenging in terms of what are you doing spending money on, and ultimately it didn't materialize, even though some of the research lived on. I'm always loath to say that nothing good comes out of it. Certainly some good things did. But in the 10 years it was our focus, it just didn't achieve its goal. And if you think about its goal, it's really consistent with Golden Dome. It's broader in focus, and it starts with a different world of technology. There are real missile defense systems. AI is really coming along, and commercial space sensors do exist, and we now are in a world of rapid prototyping. So there is environmentally, Golden Dome has a lot of advantage over SDI. On the other hand, it's broader. It purports to be able to stop any missile from anywhere of any ilk. Golden Dome in some ways is more grounded than SDI, but there are some real limits, and I'll see if I can name a couple of them. One, no shield can stop a major power arsenal from, and it's a lot like cyber. I say quite frequently that no defense can stop someone who is intentional, and offense is cheaper than defense. Golden Dome hasn't overcome that reality of how difficult it is, and even when you build it, if you can build it, it isn't going to be 100%. I haven't heard of real con-ops. I really would have wished that rather than putting 1,000 companies on a good to bid list, it would have been much more articulate about areas for investment that are necessary. Realistically, people should expect risk reduction, not miracles. Faster tracking, better
Mm,
decision making, improved limited defenses. And so we will most likely see incremental improvements, things that make us more secure incrementally, but expect meaningful progress, not perfect outcome.
yeah. That's a lot of companies, but I think it's important to remember all the different domains that are going to
Mhm.
go into this system. Very complicated. And I think that's good to have competition, right,
Yep.
among these companies. And we talked about during the government shutdown, some of these smaller companies aren't going to be able to maintain the runway for government contracts unless they see movement on stuff like that, right? So by continuing to move forward with this process and moving a little more quickly, maybe you're enticing some companies to stay
Mhm.
within this competition longer. My caution is that we don't keep all
Yeah.
1,014 of these companies and it becomes similar. I'm going to bring back my F-35 example. Lockheed has about 1,650 suppliers supporting the program with jobs across all 50 states. If you try to
Right.
keep every constituency, every congressional district happy by having
Yep.
some company, I just hope it doesn't come down to that. And I'm optimistic that we're doing acquisition reform and we're moving in this realm of competition. And we're not just going to choose somebody because we didn't have a rep in Southwest Texas yet. So we need to make sure we select one of those companies, but something to watch.
Excellent point. You want a vibrant ecosystem, but at some point you have to pick a winner. So you use a vibrant ecosystem to make sure that you have the best opportunity to find the most advantageous approach, and probably not just one, but certainly not 1,000. There's a lot of money that they're projecting on this, what, 150-ish billion dollars? Well, one, to realize it, if it can be realized, it's gonna be more than that. But one of the things to watch is how they're adjudicating who gets the money. So one of the things that happens with smaller companies, oftentimes they have the revolutionary approaches that allow us to get someplace quicker and cheaper, but they
Yeah.
haven't been battle tested in the same way. So 2 things: look at what kind of exercising we do, look for where the money goes, and see the confluence on a real approach. And that's not all gonna be out in the public, but you should see regular progress toward decision making about who's
Yeah.
gonna be doing things. If you don't have that, even with a massive pool, you can't keep everyone alive for the whole time. So how do you decide? And then how do you support, especially the revolutionary ideas, with resources that they don't typically have because they haven't won in a different time? Ultimately, we need to decide whether the money we're gonna spend is going to yield the outcome we expect. It would be hard not to see the benefit of what missile defense has done, particularly for Israel with Iron Dome, and how many missiles that Israel has endured, and how many lives have been saved by the number of those things that never reached their intended target because of their Iron Dome. There is certainly, reason to be optimistic about missile defense technology. Over time, we're gonna have to see whether this is the priority that the US needs to advance, or whether deterrence, diplomacy, some of the soft power things that bring it back to this new national security strategy aren't as heavy on as it is on technical solutions to big problems. If those technical solutions don't come with other elements of security, they will never be enough. Ooh, another hot take.
That's only two, though.
Yeah.
It comes in threes, right? So what are you watching?
Oh, I'm gonna stay with the 2 I mentioned last week. where we go in the budget, where we go on ACA, and then Venezuela. You and I were both pretty direct on this last week. I think this is an important element of national discussion, that having only 7 members of Congress having seen the absolute video, and now that it's out there, I think this is one that needs broader audience so that the U.S. can decide who we are as a nation, and that American voices can be added to our representatives who carry our will into U.S. policy. So I'd be interested to see where we go on the Venezuela, particularly on the boats play.
I think it's pretty safe to infer what our national reaction would be to the second video, given how eager the administration was to release the initial videos, right? The first strike of, boom, drop on Truth Social, here's a predator feed of this boat being blown up, right?
And I would say, I think it was Senator Tom Cotton say, yeah, well, you don't understand the larger benefit of those shootings. Well, then show them to us. Tell us how it works out. Don't give me millions of American lives per day have been saved by shooting those boats out of the water. So if you're so confident that those actions are representing the outcome that you suggest on diminishing the scourge of narcotics, then show it. But not just with wild assertions with no data behind it, numbers of which don't add up anyway. The actual numbers are bad enough. But if you're so certain that these are the actions that need to take for that outcome, given what we now know about what's going on, this is what congressional oversight is about, because we are a representative republic, and those representatives carry the nation's view. We've got to get back to doing that so that we are connected all the way to the people as we make big choices for America. And maybe that's it, Eric, that is what worries me the most, is when you take Congress out, who carries the will of the people, when you deny access to what's actually going on, not just assertions of policy, you're breaking who we are, and you're having American people go based on the news they're being fed rather than their ability to understand the issue and say, this is more important than that to me.
You also mentioned the ACAs. Sounds like the Senate is expected to do a vote Thursday on the Affordable Care Act tax credits, potentially extend them for 3 years, but the plan is not expected to pass. So we'll see what happens with that. Still watching Ukraine. Not sure if the delegation's able to make any progress with their trip to Russia. And then also, here's kind of a deep pull that I just found. The UN General Assembly is holding a WSIS plus 20 high-level meeting on the future of the information society. They're going to talk about internet governance, data flows, AI, and cyber norms. So this idea of sovereign internet might be interesting to watch. And then also, we've got the Chilean presidential runoff. We're talking about the global south, highly polarized runoff between their far-right leader and the leftist leader. First round dominated by crime and migration fears. So,
love your deep polls, particularly the one on the information space. I think goes right back around to seeing how serious this administration is on their national security strategy by saying that it is going to get involved in international standards. You and I have talked a lot about information quality, on there needing to be something. We as a collective have not done as much as I think we need to ensure that. Maybe something international is possible, but in general, the U.S. hasn't believed in tying its lot to what the international community does. But the NSS says that we're going to get more involved in standards setting, so let's see what happens from here. Love that poll of yours. I'm kind of in awe of you.
Well, I have a pretty helpful assistant.
Anyway, it's a good poll.
And go Navy, beat Army. That's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
So thanks for listening. Thanks for sending your feedback. We're here for you. Join us next week and every week for our Understandable Insights podcast. And always go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another. It makes a difference.